The wind tore across the frozen ridge, with a sound like breaking glass, and General Garrick Doyle raised his fist to halt the patrol, before he even understood why. Something was wrong. The forest had gone silent, the kind of silence that came before danger, not after it. His wolves fanned out along the tree line, ears flat, hackles raised, and then he saw her. A girl stumbled out from between two frost-covered pines, barely able to stand. Her lips were blue, her dark hair frozen stiff with ice, and her boots were soaked through and falling apart. But it was not her condition that made Garrick's chest tighten. It was what she carried. A wooden box, sealed with iron bands and a lock shaped like a crescent moon, held so tightly against her chest that her knuckles had turned white beneath the frost. "Stop where you are," Garrick called out, his voice sharp enough to cut through the howling wind. The girl did not stop. She could not. Her legs buckled, and she dropped to her knees in the snow, still clutching the box as though it were the only thing keeping her alive. One of the younger soldiers moved forward to grab her, but Garrick threw out an arm to block him. "Wait," he said. "Look at her eyes." She was staring up at them, not with fear exactly, but with something closer to fierce determination, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, and refused to break now that it had finally arrived. Her breathing was shallow, frost clung to her eyelashes, and still, she did not let go of the box. "She will die out here," Garrick muttered, mostly to himself. He crouched down in front of her, keeping his distance, and spoke in a calmer tone. "What is your name?" The girl's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her body was shaking so violently that her teeth chattered. "We are not going to hurt you," Garrick said, "but you cannot stay in this cold." She shook her head, weak but firm, and pulled the box even closer to her chest. Garrick had led patrols for 12 years under 2 different Alpha Kings, and he had learned to read the difference between a threat and a person who was simply terrified. This girl was terrified, yes, but not of him. She was terrified of what would happen if that box left her hands. Thunder rumbled somewhere far off, though there were no storm clouds in the gray winter sky. It was an odd sound, one that made every wolf in the patrol go still. Garrick had heard stories about sounds like that, sounds that came from old magic buried deep in the land, magic that predated even the Alpha King's bloodline. He pushed the thought aside. There was no time for old stories. There was a dying girl in front of him, and a decision to make. "Bring the sled," he ordered. 2 soldiers hurried to retrieve the emergency sled they carried on long patrols, built for injured wolves who could not walk back on their own. As they approached, the girl flinched hard, curling her body around the box like a shield. "No one is going to take it from you," Garrick said gently. "You have my word." Something in his voice must have reached her, because her shoulders dropped, just slightly, and she allowed the soldiers to lift her onto the sled. She kept the box wedged beneath her arms the entire time, refusing every offer to carry it separately. Garrick did not push the matter. He had learned long ago that some battles were not worth fighting, especially not with someone who had clearly already survived one much larger than anything they could offer. The journey back to the fortress took nearly 2 hours through worsening snow. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling words that made no sense to anyone around her, fragments of sentences about promises and blood, and a debt that had to be paid. Garrick walked beside the sled the entire way, watching her closely, unable to shake the feeling that they had stumbled onto something far bigger than a lost traveler. When the towering iron gates of the fortress finally came into view, the girl's eyes snapped open, and for a brief moment, pure terror crossed her face. She looked up at the banners flying above the walls, black and silver, marked with the crest of a wolf beneath a crown, and her breathing turned ragged. "No," she whispered, "not here. Anywhere but here." "You are safe," Garrick told her, though he was beginning to suspect that safety was a much more complicated question than he had first assumed. Inside the walls, word spread quickly that the patrol had returned early, and with an unexpected guest. Soldiers lined the courtyard, whispering among themselves as the sled passed. Some eyed the box with open curiosity. Others eyed the girl with suspicion, the kind reserved for outsiders who arrived carrying secrets instead of answers. Garrick did not stop to explain himself to anyone. He carried the girl himself through the main hall, her body impossibly light in his arms, the box still trapped between them. He took her directly to the healing wing, where an older woman named Nora Finch was already preparing blankets and warm broth, having heard the commotion from a mile away thanks to keen wolf senses. "Frostbite," Nora said, the moment she examined the girl's fingers. "Bad, but not lost. She is lucky you found her when you did." "She would not have survived another hour out there," Garrick said. Nora worked quickly, wrapping the girl's hands in warm cloth soaked with herbs, checking her pulse, listening to her breathing. The girl remained mostly unconscious through the treatment, occasionally stirring enough to tighten her grip on the box whenever anyone came near it. "She will not let go of that thing," Nora observed. "Not even in her sleep." "I noticed," Garrick said. "What is in it?" "I do not know. And I did not ask." She was in no state to answer. Nora studied the box for a long moment, running her eyes along the iron bands and the strange crescent-shaped lock. "That craftsmanship is old, older than anything I have seen come through these gates in years." Garrick felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. He had fought in border skirmishes, hunted rogue wolves through the mountains, and stood beside two kings during moments of crisis. But something about this girl and her box unsettled him in a way he could not quite name. "I need to inform the king," he said. Nora nodded without looking up from her work. "Tell him she will live. But whatever secret she is carrying, it nearly killed her to protect it. That should tell him something." Garrick left the healing wing and made his way through the stone corridors toward the throne room, his boots echoing against the floor. The fortress had stood for generations, built by kings who understood that strength alone could not hold a kingdom together, that loyalty and trust mattered just as much as claws and teeth. The current Alpha King, Cale Ashford, had inherited more than a throne when his father passed the crown to him 3 years earlier. He had inherited old debts, old enemies, and old secrets that no one in the fortress dared speak of openly. Cale was standing near the window when Garrick entered, his sharp golden eyes fixed on the storm outside. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet authority that did not need to be announced. He turned as soon as he heard the door open. "You found something on patrol," Cale said. It was not a question. News traveled fast within these walls. "A girl," Garrick confirmed, half frozen, carrying a sealed box she refused to let go of even as she collapsed. "Nora is treating her now." "Where did you find her?" "Near the northern ridge, alone. No tracks leading in from any direction we could identify, as if she had been wandering for days." Cale's jaw tightened slightly. The northern ridge bordered territory that had once belonged to another pack, one that no longer existed, one whose name was rarely spoken within these walls, for reasons that ran deeper than simple history. "Does she have a name?" "She has not spoken one." "She barely spoke at all, my king. Whatever she has been through, it has left her guarded in a way I have rarely seen." Cale walked toward the window again, staring out at the snow-covered mountains beyond the fortress walls. "And the box?" "Sealed with iron and an old-style lock. Nora says the craftsmanship looks older than anything we currently have within these walls." "Bring me to her." "My king, she is resting. Nora believes." "I did not ask what Nora believes," Cale said, though his tone carried no cruelty, only urgency. "Bring me to her. Now." Garrick did not argue further. He led the king through the corridors toward the healing wing, both men moving with the kind of purposeful stride that made soldiers step aside without needing to be told. When they arrived, Nora looked up in surprise but said nothing as Cale entered the room. The girl was asleep, or something close to it, her chest rising and falling in slow, exhausted breaths. Even in sleep, her arms remained curled protectively around the box, resting against her side. Cale approached slowly, careful not to startle her, and studied her face for a long moment. There was something familiar about her features, though he could not immediately place why. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, a stubborn set to her jaw even in unconsciousness. He had never seen this girl before in his life, and yet some distant part of him recognized something in her, like a half-remembered dream. "She fought hard to protect whatever is inside that box," Nora said quietly. "Nearly died doing it." Cale's eyes drifted toward the box itself, and that was when he noticed the mark on the girl's exposed hand, just below her wrist, where her sleeve had slipped during the treatment. A small symbol, faded but unmistakable, burned into her skin like an old scar. His entire body went rigid. "Garrick," Cale said, his voice suddenly very quiet. "Look at her hand." Garrick stepped closer and squinted at the mark. It took him a moment to place it, but when he did, his blood ran cold. He had seen that symbol only once before, carved into an old family crest hidden away in the fortress archives, a crest belonging to a bloodline that had been wiped out during a war fought over 2 decades ago, a war his own king's father had started. "That cannot be," Garrick whispered. Cale did not answer right away. He stood there, staring at the mark on the sleeping girl's hand, feeling the weight of a past he had never fully understood settling over the room like a shadow. Whatever this girl was carrying inside that sealed box, he understood in that moment that it was not going to be a simple matter of returning a lost traveler home. Whoever she was, she had walked straight into the heart of the very kingdom that had once tried to erase her family from existence, and she had done it carrying something important enough to nearly die protecting. "Double the guard outside this room," Cale said finally. "No one enters or leaves without my permission, not even members of the council." "Yes, my king." "And Garrick," Cale added, his eyes still fixed on the sleeping girl. "Do not tell anyone what you saw on her hand. Not yet. Not until I understand what we are truly dealing with." Garrick nodded, though the unease in his chest had not lessened at all. As he turned to leave and carry out the king's orders, he glanced back one final time at the girl sleeping peacefully, despite the storm raging both outside the walls and, he suspected, within her own troubled mind. Whatever secret she carried in that box, and whatever truth was written into the mark on her skin, one thing was already clear to everyone who had seen her that day. The mysterious girl who had stumbled out of the snow had brought something into their world that could not simply be ignored, ushering in a very different kind of storm that no wall or gate could keep out. Outside, the wind continued to howl against the fortress, but inside, a much quieter and far more dangerous kind of tension had already begun to take root. The king stayed by her bedside long after Garrick left, watching her breathe, watching the way her fingers twitched around the box even in her sleep, refusing to loosen no matter how deep her exhaustion pulled her under. He thought of his father, a man both respected and feared, a man who had built much of the kingdom's current strength on decisions Cale had never fully agreed with. He thought of the stories he had heard as a child, whispered secondhand through servants and soldiers who never spoke of the old war directly, only in careful, guarded fragments. He thought of the crest hidden away in the archives, dust-covered and nearly forgotten, and the bloodline it represented, a bloodline everyone had believed extinguished entirely. If this girl truly carried that mark, then everything he thought he understood about his own family's past was about to be tested in ways he was not certain he was prepared for. Nora quietly excused herself to give the king privacy, though she remained just outside the door, close enough to return the moment she was needed. Cale pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, elbows resting on his knees, studying the girl's face, as though searching for answers written somewhere in her exhausted features. "Whoever you are," he said quietly, more to himself than to her, "you did not come here by accident." The girl stirred slightly at the sound of his voice, her brow furrowing, though she did not wake. Cale watched her a moment longer before finally rising to leave, aware that whatever answers he needed would have to wait until she was strong enough to give them. But as he walked from the room, casting one last glance toward the sealed box still resting protectively in her arms, he could not shake the feeling that the moment she opened her eyes, nothing in his kingdom would ever be the same again. Alara Voss woke to the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, and for a moment, she did not know where she was. The ceiling above her was made of gray stone, unfamiliar and cold, nothing like the small wooden cabin she had called home for most of her life. Panic rose in her chest before memory caught up with her body, and she remembered the snow, the cold that had eaten into her bones, the soldiers who had found her collapsed on the ridge. Her hands flew immediately to her side, and relief flooded through her when her fingers closed around the familiar shape of the box. Still there, still sealed, still safe. She sat up slowly, wincing at the ache in her limbs, and looked around the small room. A single window let in pale morning light. A healer's table sat nearby, lined with jars of herbs and folded cloths. And near the door, unmoving, stood a guard she did not recognize, his eyes fixed on her the moment she stirred. "You are awake," he said simply, before stepping out into the hallway, presumably to alert someone of her condition. Alara swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her strength before attempting to stand. Her body protested every movement, muscles stiff from days of walking through freezing terrain, but she forced herself upright anyway. She would not be caught lying helpless in an enemy's fortress, not after everything she had survived to get here. The door opened again, and this time it was not a guard who entered, but the healer from the day before, a kind-faced woman named Nora, who carried a tray of warm food. "You should not be standing," Nora said, though there was no real anger in her voice. "Sit, please. You nearly froze to death out there." Alara hesitated, weighing the older woman's expression, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she allowed herself to sit back down on the edge of the bed, though she kept the box firmly in her lap. "You have been asleep for almost a full day," Nora explained, setting the tray beside her. "The frostbite on your hands is healing well, thanks to a bit of luck and a great deal of stubbornness on your part." "Where am I?" Alara asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer. "You are within the walls of the Alpha King's fortress," Nora said gently. "General Garrick found you on the northern ridge and brought you here for treatment." Alara's stomach twisted painfully. Of all the places in the world she could have collapsed, she had ended up here, inside the very stronghold she had spent her entire life being warned to avoid. She thought of her mother's voice, low and urgent, whispering warnings by candlelight about the family who ruled these lands, about the crown that had taken everything from them. "I need to leave," Alara said, rising again despite her body's protests. "You are not strong enough to travel," Nora said, though she made no move to physically stop her. "And even if you were, I do not believe the king would allow it. Not yet." "The king," Alara repeated, the word tasting bitter in her mouth. "He has already been to see you," Nora said carefully, watching Alara's reaction closely. "He gave orders that you were not to be disturbed until you woke on your own." Alara's mind raced. If the king had already seen her, had he seen the box as well? Had he seen the mark on her hand, the one she had spent years trying to keep hidden beneath long sleeves and careful movements? Her heart pounded as she instinctively pulled her sleeve down further, though the damage, if there was any, had likely already been done. "I want to speak with him," Alara said finally, surprising even herself with the sudden decision. If the king already knew something, hiding would accomplish nothing. Better to face him directly and understand exactly what she was dealing with. Nora studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I will send word. But eat something first. You will need your strength for whatever conversation is about to happen." Alara forced down a few bites of warm bread and broth, though her appetite had all but vanished beneath the weight of anxiety pressing down on her chest. Within the hour, the guard returned, informing her that the king would see her in the private council chamber, away from the ears of curious soldiers and courtiers. She was led through winding stone corridors, the box held tightly against her chest the entire way, her eyes taking in every detail of the fortress she passed. Tall banners bearing the wolf and crown crest hung from the walls, a symbol that had haunted her nightmares since childhood. Soldiers nodded respectfully to the guard escorting her, though their eyes lingered curiously on her and the box she carried. The council chamber was smaller than she expected, a circular room with a single long table and tall windows overlooking the mountains beyond. Cale Ashford stood near one of those windows when she entered, his back turned, hands clasped behind him in a posture of quiet contemplation. He turned as the door closed behind her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Alara studied him carefully, searching his face for the cruelty she had always imagined would be etched into the features of the man who now sat upon a throne, built on her family's suffering. Instead, she found only careful, measured curiosity, and something else she could not quite name. "Please, sit," Cale said, gesturing toward one of the chairs near the table. "I would rather stand," Alara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Cale did not push the matter. He simply nodded and remained standing as well, keeping a respectful distance between them. "My general tells me you have not given your name. Does it matter?" "It might," Cale said carefully. "Especially given what I saw in your hand while you were unconscious." Alara's breath caught, though she forced herself to remain still, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "Then you already know who I am." "I know what mark is burned into your skin," Cale said. "I do not yet know the person wearing it." Alara's fingers tightened around the edges of the box. My name is Alara Voss, she said finally, watching closely for his reaction. Daughter of Aldrich Voss. The name hung in the air between them like a blade. Cale's expression did not change dramatically, but something shifted behind his eyes, a recognition, a weight settling into place. The Voss family was believed to have been entirely wiped out, Cale said quietly. During the war, my father led against them over 20 years ago. Believed, Alara repeated, her voice sharp. My mother hid me the night the soldiers came. I was barely old enough to remember her face clearly, but I remember the sound of that night. I remember running through the forest while everything I knew burned behind me. Cale's jaw tightened, though he did not look away from her. I was a child myself when that war happened. I did not choose it, and I have spent years trying to understand exactly what my father did and why. Does it matter what you understand? Alara asked, her voice trembling with years of buried anger, finally finding an outlet. My family is gone because of yours. My mother spent the rest of her life in hiding, teaching me to fear this very fortress, teaching me that if the crown ever discovered I still existed, I would be hunted down just as they were. And yet you came here anyway, Cale said, carrying a box you nearly died to protect. Why? Alara hesitated, her resolve wavering for the first time since the conversation began. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind during the long journey through the snow, imagining exactly what she would say, exactly how she would confront the king responsible for her family's destruction. But standing here now, facing a man who seemed genuinely troubled by the truth rather than dismissive of it, she found her carefully prepared words slipping away from her. My mother made me promise, Alara said finally, her voice quieter now. Before she passed, she made me swear that if anything ever happened to her, I would bring this box to the fortress myself. She said it contained something the crown needed to see, something that would prove what really happened all those years ago. Cale's eyes moved to the box still clutched tightly against her chest. May I ask what is inside? Alara's grip instinctively tightened. Not yet, she said. Not until I understand exactly what kind of man is asking. Cale studied her for a long moment, and to her surprise, he did not push the matter further. Instead, he simply nodded, respecting the boundary she had drawn between them. Then I will earn that understanding, he said, however long it takes. Alara had not expected that response. She had expected demands, threats, perhaps even an attempt to seize the box by force. Instead, she found herself facing quiet patience, a willingness to wait rather than take, and it unsettled her more than outright hostility ever could have. Why would you do that? She asked. I am the daughter of a family your father tried to erase. By every right you have, you could simply take that box from me and be done with the matter entirely. Because my father's choices were not mine, Cale said firmly. And because whatever truth you are carrying inside that box, I would rather understand it fully than bury it the way he buried so many other things during his reign. Alara searched his face for deception and found none, though the caution ingrained into her since childhood refused to fully relax. Trust was not something she could offer easily, not after everything she had survived, not after every warning her mother had whispered into her ear, during countless sleepless nights, spent hiding from soldiers wearing this very crest. I will stay, Alara said finally, until I understand what kind of kingdom this truly is, but the box remains with me. Agreed, Cale said without hesitation. You will have quarters within the fortress, guards for your protection rather than your restriction, and my word, that no one will attempt to take what is yours by force. Alara nodded slowly, though the tension in her shoulders did not fully ease. As she turned to leave the council chamber, escorted by a guard toward quarters that had apparently already been prepared for her, she could not shake the strange, unfamiliar feeling settling into her chest. For years, she had imagined this fortress as nothing more than a symbol of everything that had destroyed her family. But standing here now, face to face with the man who ruled it, she found herself questioning everything she thought she understood about where true danger truly lived. Cale remained in the council chamber long after she left, staring out at the mountains beyond the window, turning her words over in his mind again and again. Aldrich Voss, a name buried deep within old records his father had never allowed him to fully examine, a name tied to secrets that had shaped the kingdom in ways he was only now beginning to understand. He thought of the box, sealed and guarded so fiercely, and wondered exactly what truth it contained, powerful enough to survive 20 years of hiding, powerful enough to bring a girl walking straight into the heart of the very danger she had spent her entire life fleeing. Whatever answers waited inside that box, Chaol understood now that his kingdom's future depended on discovering them, no matter what uncomfortable truths about his own family's past they might reveal along the way. News of the mysterious girl spread through the fortress faster than any official announcement could have managed, whispered from soldier to servant, from kitchen to barracks, until nearly everyone within the walls had heard some version of the story. A girl found in the snow, a sealed box she refused to release, a mark on her hand that supposedly matched an old and dangerous bloodline. By the time 3 days had passed, the rumors had grown far beyond anything resembling the truth. Elara noticed the whispers the moment she stepped outside her assigned quarters for the first time since her arrival. Soldiers stopped their conversations as she passed. Servants exchanged glances they thought she did not see. Even the guards assigned to escort her through the fortress grounds seemed to watch her with a mixture of curiosity and unease, as though uncertain whether she was a guest, a prisoner, or something else entirely. She kept the box with her constantly, refusing every polite suggestion that she leave it locked away somewhere secure. It never left her side, not during meals, not during her brief walks through the courtyard, not even while she slept. The weight of it had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat, a burden she had carried for so long that she could no longer imagine setting it down. "They are saying you are a spy," a voice said one afternoon as she sat alone near the fortress gardens, one of the few places within the walls that felt somewhat removed from the constant watchful eyes. Elara looked up to find a young woman standing nearby, perhaps a few years older than herself, dressed in the practical uniform of a fortress guard. Unlike most of the soldiers Elara had encountered so far, this woman's expression held no suspicion, only open curiosity. "Is that what you believe?" Elara asked cautiously. "I believe rumors travel faster than truth in a place like this," the woman said, settling onto the bench a respectful distance away. "My name is Fiona. I was part of the patrol that found you." Elara studied her for a moment, before offering a small, tentative nod of acknowledgement. "Elara." "I know," Fiona said with a slight smile. "Everyone knows by now, though I suspect very few of them know the actual reason you are here, myself included. Would it change anything if I told you?" Fiona shrugged. "Perhaps, perhaps not. But I have found that people who guard secrets as carefully as you guard that box usually have very good reasons for doing so. I am not in a hurry to judge you based on rumors alone." Something about the woman's straightforward honesty eased a small portion of the tension Elara had been carrying since her arrival. For the first time since stumbling out of the snow, she found herself speaking with someone inside these walls, without the constant weight of suspicion pressing down on the conversation. "Thank you," Elara said quietly, "for finding me. I do not think I properly thanked anyone for that." "General Doyle deserves most of that credit," Fiona said, "though I imagine you will have plenty of time to thank him yourself, given how closely he has been monitoring your safety since you arrived." Elara's brow furrowed slightly. "The king ordered guards for my protection. I assumed that included the general's continued involvement." "It does," Fiona confirmed, "though I suspect his concern extends beyond simple orders at this point. He has never been particularly comfortable with matters left unresolved, and your arrival has raised a great many unresolved questions throughout the fortress." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, and both women turned to see Chaol himself, walking through the garden path toward them, accompanied by no guards, no advisors, simply moving alone through the quiet afternoon air. Fiona rose immediately, offering a respectful bow before excusing herself, leaving Elara alone with the king for the first time since their initial meeting in the council chamber days earlier. "I did not mean to interrupt," Chaol said, though he made no move to leave. "You were not interrupting anything important," Elara replied, though she found herself sitting up straighter regardless. Chaol settled onto the opposite end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between them, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The garden around them remained quiet, except for the distant sound of soldiers training in the courtyard beyond the walls. "How are your hands healing?" Chaol asked finally. Elara glanced down at her fingers, still slightly discolored from the frostbite, but steadily improving under Nora's careful treatment. "Better. Nora says I was fortunate not to lose any fingers entirely." You were fortunate in several ways that day, Cale said. Another hour in that storm, and Garrick's patrol would have found you far too late. I know, Elara admitted quietly. I nearly did not make it. There were moments during that journey when I considered turning back, when the cold felt like more than I could survive. But I kept thinking of my mother's voice, telling me I had to see this through, no matter what it cost me. Cale studied her carefully. You said your mother made you promise to bring the box here. May I ask what happened to her? Elara's expression tightened, old grief rising to the surface despite years of practice keeping it buried. She died 2 winters ago. Illness, not violence, though I sometimes wonder if the years of hiding and fear wore down her body, long before the sickness ever took hold. She spent her entire life looking over her shoulder, waiting for soldiers to find us, the way they found my father. I am sorry, Cale said, and something in his voice told her the words were genuine, rather than simply polite. Are you? Elara asked, unable to fully mask the bitterness still lingering beneath her grief. Your family caused that fear. Your father's soldiers hunted mine across half the kingdom, until there was almost nothing left of us. I did not know the details, Cale admitted. Growing up, I was told only that there had been a war, that certain families had opposed my father's rule and paid the price for their rebellion. I was never told the full truth of what that price actually looked like. Would it have changed anything if you had known? Elara asked. You still sit on that throne. You still benefit from whatever your father took. Cale's jaw tightened, though his voice remained steady. I cannot undo what happened before I ever held any power to stop it. But I can choose what happens now that I do hold that power. That is why I want to understand what is inside your box, Elara. Not to seize it from you, but because I believe the truth matters, regardless of how uncomfortable it might be for my own family's legacy. Elara studied him carefully, searching once again for any hint of deception in his words. She found none, though the years of caution instilled in her by her mother refused to fully release their grip on her judgment. My mother always told me the crown could not be trusted, she said quietly, that anyone wearing this crest would see me only as a threat to be eliminated, not a person worth understanding. Your mother had every reason to believe that, given what she survived, Cale said. But I would ask you to consider that perhaps not everyone who wears this crest shares my father's methods or his fears. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sounds of the fortress continuing its daily routines beyond the garden walls. Elara found herself studying Cale's face, searching for the cruelty she had always associated with the crown he wore, and finding instead something far more complicated. A man burdened by inherited guilt, genuinely searching for a way to reconcile his family's past with the kind of ruler he hoped to become. I am not ready to open the box, Elara said finally. Not yet, but I am willing to consider that perhaps I judged you too quickly, before giving you any real chance to prove yourself different from what I was taught to expect. That is more than I could have hoped for, Cale said, a small, genuine smile crossing his features for the first time since their conversation began. As the afternoon light began shifting toward evening, casting long shadows across the quiet garden, Elara found herself experiencing something she had not felt in years, a fragile, cautious sense that perhaps the fortress she had feared her entire life might hold more complexity than the simple story of villains and victims her mother had painted during countless nights spent whispering warnings by candlelight. But even as that fragile trust began taking root, somewhere deep within the fortress walls, other eyes watched the growing friendship between the king and the mysterious girl, with far less patience and far more calculated interest, waiting for the right moment to act on suspicions and ambitions that had nothing to do with reconciliation or truth. Edmund Hale had served on the King's Council for nearly 30 years, first under Cale's father, and now, reluctantly in his own private opinion, under Cale himself. He was a tall, thin man with sharp eyes, and an even sharper memory, one that had never forgotten the war his old king had waged against the Voss family decades earlier, nor forgotten the reasons behind it. When word reached him that a girl bearing the Voss mark had walked directly into the fortress carrying a mysterious sealed box, his blood ran cold with an old, familiar fear he had hoped never to face again. He requested a private audience with Cale the very evening he learned the truth, finding the king alone in his private study, reviewing reports by candlelight. You wish to speak with me, Kale said, gesturing for Edmund to enter. I did, my king. Urgently. Edmund closed the door behind him before continuing, his voice low and tense. I have heard the rumors regarding the girl your patrol found. I need to know if they are true. Kale set down the report he had been reading, studying his old advisor carefully. What exactly have you heard? That she carries the Voss mark, that she claims to be the daughter of Aldrich Voss himself. She does carry the mark, Kale confirmed, and she has identified herself as his daughter. Yes. Edmund's expression tightened, old memories clearly rising unbidden behind his sharp eyes. My king, you must understand the danger this represents. The Voss family did not simply oppose your father out of ordinary political disagreement. They possessed knowledge, resources, connections to old bloodline magic that your father spent years working to contain. Contain or destroy? Kale asked pointedly. Edmund hesitated, choosing his next words with visible care. Whatever methods your father used, they were deemed necessary at the time to protect this kingdom from a threat far greater than simple rebellion. If this girl has returned carrying something from that bloodline, we cannot afford to treat the matter lightly. She has done nothing threatening since her arrival, Kale said firmly. She nearly died in the snow simply trying to reach these walls. Whatever she carries, I believe she came here seeking truth, not conflict. With respect, my king, you are young, and you did not witness firsthand what that family was capable of during the height of the conflict. I did. I watched good soldiers fall to abilities we did not fully understand and could barely defend against. Kale's expression darkened slightly, though his voice remained controlled. Are you suggesting we treat her as a prisoner rather than the guest I have declared her to be? I am suggesting caution, Edmund said carefully. That box she carries so protectively concerns me greatly. If it contains anything resembling the old bloodline artifacts the Voss family was known to possess, it could pose a genuine danger to this fortress and everyone within it. She has not opened it. She has not threatened anyone. I will not violate the trust I have offered her without genuine cause. Edmund studied the king for a long moment, clearly recognizing the futility of pressing the matter further in this particular conversation. He offered a respectful bow, though something calculating remained behind his composed expression as he excused himself from the study. Alone once again, Kale sat in troubled silence, turning Edmund's warnings over in his mind. He did not fully trust his old advisor's motivations, sensing something beyond simple concern for the kingdom's safety lurking beneath the surface of his urgency. But he also could not entirely dismiss the possibility that Edmund's fears held some legitimate foundation, given his first-hand experience with the war that had shaped so much of the kingdom's current fears surrounding the Voss bloodline. Meanwhile, in a different corridor of the fortress, Edmund made his way toward the private chambers of several other council members who shared his particular concerns regarding the old war and its unresolved consequences. Behind closed doors, quiet conversations began taking shape. Conversations that had nothing to do with patience or understanding, and everything to do with eliminating what they perceived as a resurging threat before it could fully take root within the kingdom's foundations. Ilara remained unaware of these gathering tensions, as she settled into an uneasy but increasingly familiar routine within the fortress walls. Days passed in careful observation, cautious conversations with Fiona, and occasionally with Nora, and slowly lengthening moments spent in Kale's company, as he continued patiently working to earn the trust her mother had taught her never to extend to anyone wearing the crown's crest. One evening, as autumn winds gave way to the deepening chill of early winter once again, Ilara found herself walking along the fortress ramparts alongside Kale, the mountains beyond, bathed in the last golden light of a fading sunset. You seem troubled tonight, Ilara observed, noticing the tension in his shoulders that had not been present during their previous conversations. Kale hesitated before answering, weighing how much to share with her. There are members of my council who remember the war against your family firsthand. Your presence here has reawakened old fears among them, fears I am still working to understand fully myself. Ilara's chest tightened with old, familiar anxiety. Do they believe I pose a threat? Some do, Kale admitted honestly. Though I do not share that belief, not based on anything I have witnessed since your arrival. My mother always warned me that the crown would never fully trust anyone bearing our family's mark, Ilara said quietly. Perhaps she was right to fear that, even here, even with you. I will not allow anyone to harm you while you remain under my protection, Cale said firmly. That is a promise I intend to keep, regardless of what pressure my council attempts to apply. Alara studied his face in the fading light, searching once again for any hint of deception, and finding instead only quiet, unwavering resolve. Despite everything her mother had taught her to expect from this fortress and the crown that ruled it, she found herself believing him, at least in this particular moment, standing together along walls that had once represented nothing but danger to everyone in her family's bloodline. "Thank you," she said softly. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, and both turned to see Garrick climbing the stairs toward the ramparts, his expression carrying a seriousness that immediately drew both their attention. "My king," Garrick said, his voice low, "I believe you should know that several council members have been meeting privately over the past few days. I do not yet know the full nature of their discussions, but given the timing, I suspect it relates to our guest." Cale's expression hardened slightly. "Keep me informed of anything further you learn." "Of course, my king." As Garrick departed, leaving Cale and Alara once again alone along the quiet ramparts, a heavy silence settled between them, the earlier warmth of their conversation now shadowed by the growing awareness that not everyone within these walls shared Cale's patient willingness toward reconciliation and understanding. "Perhaps I should leave," Alara said quietly, old instincts urging her toward the same caution that had kept her safe throughout years spent hiding from exactly this kind of danger. "Before my presence here causes conflict within your own council." "No," Cale said firmly, turning to face her directly. "You came here seeking truth, and I intend to help you find it, regardless of what resistance my council might offer. Leaving now would only prove to them that fear and old prejudice can still dictate the choices made within these walls, and that is not the kind of kingdom I intend to lead." Alara searched his eyes for any sign of hesitation and found none. Slowly, cautiously, something that felt dangerously close to hope began settling into her chest, a feeling she had not allowed herself to experience in longer than she could clearly remember. But even as that fragile hope took root, somewhere deep within the fortress, Edmund Hale and his gathered allies continued their quiet, calculated discussions, laying plans that would soon threaten to shatter whatever fragile peace was beginning to form between the king and the girl who carried both an old family's mark and a secret, powerful enough to change the very foundations of the kingdom itself. The council chamber felt colder than usual the following morning, though no windows had been left open and no fires had gone untended. Cale sat at the head of the long table, watching the faces of the men and women who advised him, searching for any sign of the private meetings Garrick had warned him about the previous night. Most of the council members met his gaze without hesitation, their expressions calm and unreadable. Only Edmund Hale seemed unable to fully mask the tension coiled beneath his composed exterior. "We have several matters of trade to discuss today," Cale began, deliberately keeping his tone neutral, watching closely for reactions as the meeting progressed. The morning passed through ordinary business, reports on grain reserves, updates on border patrols, discussions regarding an upcoming alliance meeting with a neighboring pack. Cale participated fully, giving no outward indication that he suspected anything unusual brewing beneath the surface of his council's cooperation. But as the meeting drew toward its natural conclusion, Edmund cleared his throat and raised a hand for attention. "My king, if I may, there is one additional matter the council believes requires discussion, the girl currently residing within our walls." Cale's expression remained carefully neutral. "What about her?" "Several of us have grown increasingly concerned regarding the potential risk she represents," Edmund said, glancing briefly toward the other council members seated around the table, several of whom nodded in quiet agreement. "The box she carries remains unexamined. We do not know its contents, and given her bloodline's history within this kingdom, that uncertainty poses a genuine security concern." "She has given no indication of hostile intent," Cale replied evenly. "Nor has she made any move to use whatever the box contains against anyone within these walls. With respect, my king, the absence of an attack does not guarantee the absence of danger," another council member added, an older woman named Prudence, who had served the kingdom for nearly as long as Edmund himself. "We are simply asking that appropriate precautions be taken until the contents of that box can be properly verified." "What precautions are you suggesting?" Cale asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The box should be examined, Edmund said firmly. By council-appointed inspectors, under controlled conditions, regardless of the girl's personal wishes on the matter. Cale's jaw tightened, though he kept his voice level. I gave her my word that the box would remain in her possession until she chose to reveal its contents herself. I do not intend to break that promise based on speculation alone. Then perhaps that promise was made too hastily, Edmund pressed, an edge creeping into his otherwise measured tone. You are young, my king, and I understand the desire to distance yourself from your father's methods. But some of his caution regarding the Voss bloodline was rooted in genuine, hard-learned experience. I would ask you to consider that experience before dismissing our concerns entirely. The room fell silent, tension thick enough that Cale could feel it pressing against his chest. He studied the faces around the table carefully, recognizing genuine fear in some, and something far more calculated in others, particularly in Edmund's sharp, unwavering gaze. I will consider the council's concerns, Cale said finally, choosing his words with deliberate care. But I will not act against the girl or her belongings without proper cause. This meeting is concluded. As the council members filed out of the chamber, murmuring quietly among themselves, Cale remained seated, turning the tense exchange over carefully in his mind. Edmund's insistence carried a sharper edge than simple caution warranted, and Cale found himself increasingly certain that his old advisor's motivations extended beyond straightforward concern for the kingdom's safety. He did not have long to dwell on the matter, however, before Garrick appeared at the chamber door, his expression grim. My king, we have a problem. What kind of problem? Elara is missing from her quarters. Fiona went to check on her a short while ago and found the room empty, with signs of a struggle. Cale's blood turned to ice. He rose immediately from his seat, every instinct urging him toward immediate action. Signs of what kind of struggle? An overturned chair, a torn piece of fabric near the window. Whoever took her moved quickly and quietly, avoiding the guards posted at her door, which means someone with knowledge of our patrol rotations, Cale said grimly, already moving toward the door. I fear that may be the case, my king, Garrick said, following closely behind him. Together, they moved swiftly through the fortress, gathering additional soldiers as they went, questioning anyone who might have witnessed something useful. A young servant reported seeing several unfamiliar figures near the eastern courtyard shortly before dawn, moving with unusual urgency toward one of the lesser-used storage buildings near the outer wall. Cale led the search himself, refusing to remain behind while soldiers handled the matter without him. Fear and fury warred within his chest as they approached the storage building Garrick's scouts had identified, the structure old and mostly forgotten, rarely used except for storing broken equipment awaiting repair. Inside, they found Elara bound to a wooden support beam, her mouth gagged, her eyes wide with fear and fury in equal measure. Standing over her, box in hand, examining the iron bands and crescent-shaped lock with cold curiosity, was Edmund Hale, accompanied by two soldiers Cale recognized as loyal to the older council faction that had long resisted his more progressive approach to leadership. Release her immediately, Cale commanded, his voice carrying a dangerous authority that echoed through the small structure. Edmund turned, unsurprised by their arrival, though his expression carried none of the guilt Cale might have expected. My king, I did what was necessary to protect this kingdom. I could not allow unknown dangers to remain unexamined simply due to a promise made without full understanding of the risks involved. You took her against her will, and against my direct orders, Cale said, closing the distance between them, his soldiers moving to secure the two accompanying guards without resistance. I took precautions, Edmund corrected, though his voice carried less conviction now, sensing the shifting balance of power within the small room. This box may contain knowledge or artifacts capable of threatening everything your father worked to secure. I intended only to examine its contents safely, away from the girl's ability to interfere. That was not your decision to make, Cale said coldly, moving quickly to untie Elara from the beam, while keeping a watchful eye on Edmund and the box he still held. Elara gasped as the gag was removed, her wrists raw from the ropes that had bound her. He came into my room before dawn, she said, her voice shaking with residual fear and anger. Two others held me down while he searched for the box. I fought as hard as I could, but there were too many of them. Cale's fury deepened as he took the box gently from Edmund's hands, immediately returning it to Elara's grasp. She clutched it against her chest, breathing hard, relief and lingering terror battling across her features. "You will answer for this," Cale said, turning back toward Edmund, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "Take him into custody, along with everyone who participated in this act." Soldiers moved quickly to restrain Edmund, who offered no resistance, though his expression remained defiant, even as he was led away. "You will come to understand eventually, my king, that some dangers cannot simply be reasoned with through patience and trust alone." As Edmund and his accomplices were escorted from the storage building, Cale turned his full attention back to Alara, kneeling beside her to examine the rope marks on her wrists with careful concern. "Are you injured beyond this?" he asked gently. "I will be fine," Alara said, though her voice still trembled slightly. "Thank you for finding me so quickly." "I should have anticipated this," Cale said, guilt heavy in his voice. "I knew Edmund's concerns ran deeper than simple caution, and I failed to act quickly enough to prevent this from happening." "You could not have known he would go this far," Alara said, though her earlier trust felt suddenly fragile again, old fears resurfacing, despite everything Cale had done to earn her confidence over the preceding days. Cale helped her to her feet, his hand steady beneath her arm, as her legs remained unsteady from the ordeal. "I promise you, Alara, this will not happen again. Whatever trust remains between us, I intend to prove myself worthy of it, regardless of what resistance I face from within my own walls." Alara studied his face carefully, searching for any hint of the calculated deception Edmund had displayed, and finding instead only genuine remorse and determined resolve. Slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to lean slightly into his steadying support as they made their way back toward the safety of the main fortress, the box still held tightly against her chest, protected once again, though the danger surrounding it had clearly grown far more serious than either of them had initially anticipated. Sleep did not come easily to Alara that night, despite Nora's insistence that rest would help her recover from the ordeal in the storage building. She lay awake in her quarters, the box resting beside her pillow within arm's reach, replaying the fear of being bound and helpless over and over in her mind. It reminded her too sharply of another night, years earlier, when she had been small enough to fit entirely within her mother's arms, as they fled through darkened forests while soldiers searched the burning remains of their home behind them. She had been barely 5 years old the night everything changed, too young to fully understand what was happening, old enough to remember fragments that had haunted her ever since: the smell of smoke, her mother's rapid, frightened breathing, the distant shouts of soldiers moving through the trees, searching for survivors who were never meant to escape the purge ordered against their family, and the small community of allies who had supported them. Her mother, Miriam, had never spoken openly about what exactly her father had done to draw the old king's wrath so severely. She spoke only in careful fragments, warnings wrapped around half-truths, teaching Alara caution, without ever fully explaining the reasons behind it. It was only in the final months before her mother's death, when illness had stripped away her usual guarded composure, that Miriam finally began revealing pieces of the truth Alara had spent her entire life searching for. "Your father was not a rebel," Miriam had whispered during one of her final lucid nights, her voice weak but urgent. "He was a scholar, Alara. He studied the old bloodline magic that predates even the current royal family's claim to this land. He believed that magic belonged to everyone, not simply those who could seize and hoard it through conquest." "What happened to him?" Alara had asked, holding her mother's frail hand tightly. "He discovered something," Miriam continued, her breathing labored. "Evidence buried in old records, proof that certain lands currently claimed by the crown were never rightfully theirs to begin with. He believed the truth needed to be revealed, that the kingdom could not build a just future while resting on stolen foundations. The old king saw that discovery as a direct threat to his authority, and he moved to eliminate anyone who might expose it." "The box," Alara had whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. "Everything he discovered is inside," Miriam confirmed. "Documents, records, proof of what really happened during the founding years of this kingdom's current royal line. I hid it after the soldiers came, keeping it safe through every year we spent running and hiding, waiting for the right moment to finally reveal the truth." "Why did you wait so long?" Alara had asked. "Because revealing it too soon, before you were strong enough to survive whatever consequences followed, would have accomplished nothing," except placing you in even greater danger, Miriam explained. I made you a promise instead, Alara. When I am gone, and when you believe you are ready, you must carry that box back to the fortress yourself, not to seek revenge, but to finally bring the truth into the light, regardless of how uncomfortable it may prove, for those currently sitting upon that throne. Alara had carried that promise with her every day since her mother's passing, through 2 long years spent preparing herself, gathering the courage necessary to finally undertake the journey her mother had entrusted to her. She had not expected to nearly die in a snowstorm along the way. She certainly had not expected to find herself slowly, cautiously trusting the very king she had been raised to fear. Lying awake now, staring at the ceiling of her fortress quarters, Alara found herself questioning everything she thought she understood about her mission here. Edmund's attack had reminded her sharply that danger remained very real within these walls, that not everyone shared Cale's apparent willingness toward understanding and reconciliation. But Cale's swift response, his genuine fury at the betrayal, his careful protection of both her safety and the box itself, continued nagging at the edges of her carefully maintained caution. A soft knock at her door interrupted her troubled thoughts. She rose carefully, box in hand out of habit now too deeply ingrained to abandon even within the relative safety of her guarded quarters, and opened the door to find Cale standing outside, his expression carrying quiet concern. I could not sleep either, he admitted, before she could ask why he had come. I wanted to check that you were resting comfortably, given everything that happened today. I appreciate the concern, Alara said, stepping aside to allow him entry, though she remained near the door, rather than retreating fully into the room. Though I imagine sleep will not come easily for either of us tonight. Cale nodded, understanding evident in his expression. Edmund and his accomplices remain in custody. I intend to see them properly tried for their actions, regardless of whatever influence they once held within my council. What will happen to them? That depends largely on the full extent of what they intended, Cale said. Edmund claimed he only wished to examine the box's contents. But binding you against your will, using force within these walls without my authorization, those are serious offenses regardless of his stated intentions. Alara studied his face carefully in the dim candlelight of her quarters. Cale, I need to tell you something about what is actually inside this box. His expression sharpened with careful attention, though he said nothing, allowing her the space to continue at her own pace. My father was not simply a rebel who opposed your family's rule, Alara said slowly, choosing her words with deliberate care. He was a scholar. He discovered evidence buried in old records suggesting that certain lands currently claimed by your family's crown were never rightfully theirs to begin with, that they were taken through means your family's history has long obscured. Cale's expression remained carefully controlled, though Alara could see the weight of her words settling heavily behind his eyes. What kind of evidence? I do not fully know myself, Alara admitted. My mother never opened the box in my presence, choosing instead to keep its contents sealed until I was ready to bring it here myself. But she was certain it contained proof significant enough to threaten your family's claim to at least a portion of the territory currently under your rule. The silence that followed stretched long and heavy between them, both of them recognizing the magnitude of what she had just revealed. Cale finally spoke, his voice carrying careful, measured consideration rather than immediate denial or defensiveness. If that is true, he said slowly, then my father's war against your family was not simply about eliminating a perceived rebellion. It was about silencing evidence that could have undermined his entire claim to rule. That is what my mother believed, Alara confirmed quietly. Cale was quiet for a long moment, processing the full weight of what she had shared. Alara, I need you to understand something. Regardless of what that evidence ultimately reveals, regardless of what it might mean for my family's claim to this territory, I want to see the truth brought fully into the light. I will not repeat my father's methods by attempting to suppress or destroy whatever you are carrying. Even if it costs you your throne? Alara asked, watching his reaction carefully. Even then, Cale said firmly, and something in his voice told her he genuinely meant it. A kingdom built on buried lies is not a kingdom worth ruling. If the truth demands sacrifice from me, then I will make that sacrifice, rather than continue perpetuating whatever injustice my father committed against your family. Alara felt something shift within her chest, a fragile, cautious hope finally beginning to outweigh years of carefully maintained fear and suspicion. She had come to this fortress prepared to face an enemy, prepared to fulfill her mother's final wish, regardless of the personal cost involved. She had not expected to find someone genuinely willing to face uncomfortable truths about his own family's legacy, with such apparent sincerity. "I am not ready to open the box tonight," she said finally. "But I believe, soon, I will be ready to reveal everything it contains, to you, and to whoever else needs to understand the full truth of what happened all those years ago. Whenever you are ready," Cale said gently, "I will be here to see it through with you." As he departed her quarters that night, leaving her alone once again with her thoughts and the ever-present weight of the box beside her, Elara found herself staring at the ceiling with a very different kind of restlessness than before. The fear remained, old and deeply ingrained, but alongside it now grew something new, a fragile, cautious belief that perhaps the truth her mother had entrusted her to carry might finally find the justice it deserved, not through revenge or destruction, but through honest reckoning between two families whose shared history had been built on far more complicated foundations than either of them had ever fully understood. Edmund Hale sat alone in the fortress holding cell, the cold stone walls doing nothing to cool the burning frustration coursing through him. He had served this kingdom loyally for 30 years, had watched Cale's father build a strong, secure realm through decisive action rather than hesitant deliberation, and now found himself imprisoned for attempting to protect that same legacy from what he genuinely believed represented a serious threat. He was not without allies, however. Several soldiers who had served under the old king remained loyal to the values Edmund represented, values that prioritized strength and caution over what they viewed as Cale's dangerously idealistic approach to leadership. One such soldier, a young guard named Peter, arrived at the cell late that night under the guise of a routine check, though the look he exchanged with Edmund carried far more significance than simple duty. "The others are growing restless," Peter whispered, glancing carefully down the corridor to ensure they remained unobserved. "They believe the king has lost his judgment entirely, imprisoning his own advisor to protect an outsider carrying dangerous, unknown magic." "What do they propose?" Edmund asked quietly. "Some believe the box should simply be taken by force, examined properly, and its contents dealt with according to whatever threat they reveal. Others believe the girl herself represents the greater danger, regardless of what she carries." Edmund considered this carefully, old instincts warring against the more measured caution that had guided his decades of service. "I do not condone violence against the girl herself. My intention was only ever to examine the box's contents safely, away from any risk to the fortress." "Perhaps," Peter said carefully, "but your methods failed. The king remains convinced of the girl's harmlessness, and he has made it clear he intends to defend her and her secrets, regardless of council opposition. If we do not act more decisively, that box and whatever it contains will remain unexamined indefinitely." Edmund studied the young guard for a long moment, weighing the wisdom of continuing down this dangerous path against his genuine, deeply held belief that the kingdom's safety hung in the balance. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "There is another way to obtain the box," Peter said quietly, "without involving you directly, given your current circumstances. But it would require moving quickly, before the king's guard around the girl grows too tight to penetrate." Edmund hesitated, some deeply buried remnant of caution urging him to refuse, to accept the consequences of his earlier actions, and allow the matter to resolve through proper legal channels. But years of conviction regarding the Voss family's danger, reinforced by decades of stories about the war his old king had fought against them, ultimately overpowered that hesitation. "Do what you believe necessary," Edmund said finally, "but be careful. The king will not show mercy a second time if you are caught." Peter nodded and slipped quietly away from the cell, leaving Edmund alone once again with his troubled thoughts and the growing certainty that events within the fortress were about to take a far more dangerous turn than anyone currently anticipated. Elsewhere within the fortress, unaware of the dangerous conspiracy taking shape in the shadows, Cale spent the following days working to strengthen the bond of trust that had begun forming between himself and Elara. He arranged for her to have greater freedom to move throughout the fortress grounds, accompanied always by trusted guards, rather than the suspicious watchfulness that had characterized her earlier days within the walls. He introduced her formally to several members of his council who had not participated in Edmund's conspiracy, working carefully to demonstrate that not everyone within these walls shared the old fears and prejudices that had led to her earlier capture. Fiona in particular became a steady, reassuring presence in Alara's daily routine, the two women developing a genuine friendship that provided Alara with much-needed emotional support during an otherwise deeply uncertain period of her life. They spent afternoons walking through the fortress gardens, Fiona sharing stories of her own childhood growing up within the walls, Alara slowly, cautiously opening up about fragments of her own hidden past, though she remained careful never to reveal the full truth about the box's contents to anyone beyond Cale himself. "You seem different than when you first arrived," Fiona observed one afternoon, as they sat together near the same garden bench where Alara had first spoken with Cale weeks earlier. "I feel different," Alara admitted, "though I am not entirely certain that is a comfortable feeling. I spent my entire life believing this fortress represented nothing but danger. Learning to trust it, even partially, feels like betraying everything my mother taught me to believe." "Perhaps it is not betrayal," Fiona offered gently. "Perhaps it is simply growth, learning that the world holds more complexity than the simple lessons we absorbed as children, regardless of how well-intentioned those lessons might have been." Alara considered this carefully, finding genuine wisdom in her friend's perspective. "I want to believe that. I want to believe that the truth I carry can bring healing, rather than more conflict. But Edmund's attack reminded me sharply that not everyone shares that hope. Edmund represents an old way of thinking that Cale has been working to move beyond since he first took the throne," Fiona said. "His imprisonment sends a clear message throughout the fortress that such methods will no longer be tolerated, regardless of how deeply rooted certain fears remain among the older generation of soldiers and advisors." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of urgent footsteps approaching, and both women turned to see Garrick moving quickly toward them, his expression carrying the same grim urgency that had characterized his arrival on the night of Alara's earlier abduction. "Alara, you need to come with me immediately," Garrick said without preamble. "We have received word of a potential threat regarding your continued presence here." "What kind of threat?" Alara asked, her earlier fragile sense of security immediately giving way to renewed alertness. "Several soldiers loyal to Edmund's faction have gone missing from their posts within the past hour," Garrick explained, already moving to escort both women back toward the main fortress building. "Given the timing, we believe they may be planning another attempt to seize the box, potentially through more forceful means than Edmund's earlier attempt." Alara's grip tightened instinctively around the box she still carried everywhere, old fear resurfacing, despite the progress she had made in trusting her surroundings over the preceding weeks. "Where is Cale?" "Coordinating additional security measures throughout the fortress," Garrick said. "He asked that I bring you to the most secure section of the keep immediately, where additional guards can better protect you until this threat is properly identified and neutralized." As they hurried through the fortress corridors, soldiers moving with visible urgency throughout the halls, Alara felt the fragile sense of safety she had begun building over the preceding weeks, crumbling once again beneath the weight of renewed danger. She thought of her mother's warnings, of the years spent hiding and running, and wondered whether true safety would ever truly be possible for someone carrying the kind of dangerous truth she held sealed within the box against her chest. They reached the secure inner keep without incident, Garrick immediately posting additional guards at every entrance, while continuing to coordinate with soldiers searching for the missing conspirators throughout the fortress grounds. Fiona remained close by Alara's side, offering quiet reassurance even as tension continued mounting throughout the tense evening hours that followed. It was nearly midnight when Cale finally arrived, his expression carrying visible exhaustion and barely restrained anger. "We have located and detained most of the soldiers involved in this latest conspiracy," he reported, moving immediately to Alara's side to confirm her safety with his own eyes. Though one individual, a young guard named Peter, remains unaccounted for. "Do you believe he still intends to act?" Alara asked, her voice steady, despite the fear still coursing beneath the surface. "I believe we cannot afford to assume otherwise," Cale said grimly. "Until he is located and this threat fully neutralized, I want you remaining within this secure section of the keep, guarded at all times." Alara nodded, understanding the necessity, even as frustration mounted, at yet another disruption to the fragile peace she had been working so carefully to build within these walls. How long do you believe this will take? I do not know, Cale admitted honestly. But I promise you, Alara, I will not rest until this threat is fully resolved, and your safety, along with the truth you carry, is properly secured. As the night wore on, tension continuing to grip the fortress, while soldiers searched every corner for the missing conspirator, Alara found herself once again questioning whether the peace and trust she had begun building here could truly withstand the weight of old fears and deeply entrenched prejudices that seemed determined to threaten it at every turn. But even amid that uncertainty, she found herself grateful, genuinely and deeply, for Cale's unwavering commitment to her protection, a commitment that continued proving itself far stronger than the doubts her mother's warnings had originally instilled within her. Peter moved carefully through the shadowed maintenance tunnels beneath the fortress, passages few soldiers bothered learning since the introduction of the main corridors decades earlier. He had discovered them during his early years of service, mapping their winding paths during quiet, uneventful patrol shifts, never imagining he would one day rely on that forgotten knowledge to accomplish something so dangerously significant. He carried with him a small crossbow and a coil of sturdy rope, tools he hoped would prove unnecessary but had prepared regardless. Given the seriousness of what he intended to attempt, his plan was simple in concept if difficult in execution. Reach the secure inner keep through the old tunnel system, bypass the heavy guard presence stationed at the main entrances, and locate the girl and her box before anyone realized the danger had already penetrated their defenses. He had convinced himself over the preceding hours that his actions served the greater good of the kingdom, that Edmund's warnings about the Voss family's dangerous magic justified whatever risks his mission required. He thought of the stories he had heard as a younger soldier, second-hand accounts from veterans of the old war who spoke in hushed, fearful tones about abilities that could not be explained through ordinary means, and he told himself that preventing such dangers from resurfacing was worth any personal risk involved. The tunnel emerged near a rarely used storage room adjacent to the inner keep's eastern wing, close enough to the secure section where Alara remained under heavy guard that Peter could hear muffled voices and movement from beyond the thick stone walls separating them. He paused there, weighing his next move carefully, aware that the heaviest concentration of guards would likely be stationed near the main entrances, rather than this obscure connecting passage. What Peter did not know, however, was that Garrick had anticipated exactly this kind of approach. Having served as a soldier within these walls for over a decade, the general possessed intimate knowledge of every forgotten passage and overlooked entrance throughout the fortress, knowledge he had used to quietly station additional guards at precisely the locations most soldiers assumed would remain unwatched. As Peter emerged cautiously from the storage room, crossbow raised in readiness, he found himself facing not an unguarded corridor, but 3 fully armed soldiers, weapons already trained upon him before he could react. "Lower your weapon," one of the soldiers commanded firmly. "By order of General Doyle, you are under arrest for conspiracy against the crown." Peter's mind raced, weighing his rapidly narrowing options. Surrender meant certain punishment, likely imprisonment alongside Edmund and the earlier conspirators. But resistance against 3 armed soldiers, in such a confined space, offered virtually no realistic chance of success. "I acted only out of concern for this kingdom's safety," Peter said, though even as he spoke the words, doubt had begun creeping into his previously unwavering conviction. "That is not your judgment to make," the soldier replied firmly. "Lower your weapon, and this can be resolved without further violence." After a long, tense moment, Peter finally lowered the crossbow, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. The soldiers moved quickly to restrain him, escorting him away from the inner keep, toward the same holding cells where Edmund and his earlier accomplices already awaited judgment for their actions. Word reached Cale within minutes of the successful capture, and he immediately made his way to the inner keep to personally confirm that the threat had been fully neutralized. He found Alara still awake despite the late hour, sitting with Fiona in a small sitting room adjacent to her secured quarters, both women visibly relieved by the news he brought. "He has been captured," Cale confirmed, settling into a chair near where Alara sat. "The threat has been fully contained." "Thank goodness," Fiona said, releasing a breath she had clearly been holding for hours. Alara studied Cale's face carefully, noting the exhaustion evident in his features, despite the relief clearly present as well. "This is the second attempt against me within a matter of weeks. I worry these will not be the last." I intend to ensure they are, Cale said firmly. Both Edmund and Peter will face formal judgment before the full council tomorrow, and I will make it unmistakably clear to everyone within these walls that further attempts against your safety will not be tolerated under any circumstances. Even from those loyal to your father's old ways? Elara asked. Especially from them, Cale replied. I understand their fears carry some foundation in genuine historical experience. But fear does not justify violating the trust and protection I have promised to extend to you. That promise remains absolute. Fiona excused herself shortly afterward, sensing the private nature the conversation had begun taking, leaving Cale and Elara alone in the quiet sitting room. The candles had burned low, casting long shadows across the stone walls, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply absorbing the relief of the immediate crisis having finally passed. I think I am ready, Elara said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Cale's expression sharpened with careful attention. Ready for what? To open the box, Elara said, her voice steady, despite the weight of the decision she had clearly been carrying toward for some time now. I have watched you protect me through 2 separate attempts against my safety. I have watched you defend not just my physical well-being, but my right to reveal the truth on my own terms, even against pressure from your own council. I believe now that you deserve to see what my mother entrusted me to carry here. Are you certain? Cale asked gently. You do not need to rush this decision simply because of tonight's events. I am certain, Elara said, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she genuinely meant it. My mother wanted this truth revealed, Cale. Continuing to delay that revelation accomplishes nothing except prolonging the danger surrounding both of us. It is time the full truth finally comes to light. Cale nodded slowly, understanding the significance of the moment settling heavily between them. Then let us do this properly. Tomorrow morning, before the council gathers to judge Edmund and Peter's actions, we will open the box together. Whatever truth it reveals, we will face it honestly, and we will decide together how best to proceed from there. Elara felt a complicated mixture of relief and renewed anxiety settling into her chest at his words. Years of carrying this burden, years of her mother's careful warnings and instructions, all building toward this singular moment that now finally approached with genuine, tangible certainty.
Thank you, she said quietly, for giving me the space and the trust to reach this decision on my own terms, rather than forcing it through fear or coercion, the way Edmund attempted.
You deserve nothing less, Cale said simply. Whatever truth that box contains, Elara, I want you to know that my commitment to seeing justice done, regardless of what it costs my own family's legacy, remains absolute. As Cale departed the sitting room that night, leaving Elara alone with her thoughts and the box that had defined so much of her existence for as long as she could clearly remember, she found herself staring at the sealed container with an entirely different kind of anticipation than she had carried throughout her long journey to reach these walls. Tomorrow, finally, after years of hiding and running and carrying a secret too heavy for one person to bear alone, the truth her father had died protecting, and her mother had spent her final years safeguarding, would finally see the light it had been waiting so patiently to reach. Morning arrived with pale golden light filtering through the tall windows of the council chamber, where Cale had arranged for a small, private gathering ahead of the formal judgment scheduled for Edmund and Peter later that day. Only a handful of people had been invited to witness this moment. Garrick, whose steady presence had protected Elara from the very first day of her arrival, Nora, who had tended her wounds and earned her quiet trust, and Fiona, whose friendship had provided crucial support throughout the difficult weeks since her arrival within the fortress walls. Elara stood at the head of the long table, the box resting before her for the first time not clutched protectively against her chest, but placed deliberately upon the polished wooden surface, where everyone present could witness what was about to unfold. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the crescent-shaped lock, years of careful protection warring against the finality of the moment now finally arriving. You do not have to do this if you are not ready, Cale said quietly, standing beside her, close enough to offer support without crowding the moment that clearly belonged to her alone. I am ready, Elara said, and her voice, though soft, carried unmistakable resolve. My mother waited years for this moment. I will not delay it any further. She produced a small, worn key from within her coat, one she had kept hidden and secured throughout her entire journey, protected even during the worst moments of the snowstorm that had nearly claimed her life. The key fit perfectly into the crescent-shaped lock, and with a soft click that seemed to echo through the otherwise silent chamber, the iron bands finally released their hold. Alara lifted the lid slowly, revealing the contents that had remained hidden for over 2 decades. Inside lay a collection of carefully preserved documents, their edges worn but the ink still legible, along with several small objects wrapped in protective cloth, and a single, ornate ring, bearing an insignia that immediately caught Cale's attention. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the topmost document. Alara nodded, and Cale carefully lifted the aged paper, his eyes scanning the contents with growing intensity. The document was written in his father's own official seal, dated over 25 years earlier, detailing land grants and territorial boundaries that Cale had always understood to be foundational elements of his family's original claim to rule. But as he read further, comparing the document against a second, older paper beneath it, his expression shifted from careful curiosity to genuine shock. "This cannot be accurate," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "What does it say?" Garrick asked, moving closer to examine the documents alongside him. "According to this original land survey," Cale said slowly, "the Eastern Territories currently claimed under my family's rule were originally granted not to my great-grandfather, but to a scholarly alliance that included the Voss family among its founding members. My family's later claim appears to have been established through a falsified boundary revision, one that conveniently erased any record of the original agreement." Alara watched his reaction carefully, years of anticipation finally giving way to the reality of watching her father's discovery confirmed before witnesses who held real power to act upon its implications. "My father discovered this evidence while researching Old Kingdom records for what he believed was simple historical scholarship. He never intended to challenge your family's rule directly. He only wanted the truth properly documented and acknowledged. And my father silenced him for it," Cale said, his voice heavy with the weight of a truth he had clearly not been prepared to fully accept, despite his earlier assurances that he would face whatever revelations the box contained without flinching. Nora, who had remained quietly observant throughout the revelation, finally spoke. "My king, if I may, this document alone does not necessarily invalidate your family's current claim to rule. 25 years of governance, of maintaining peace and stability throughout these territories, carries significant weight regardless of the questionable origins involved." "That may be true from a practical standpoint," Cale acknowledged, "but it does not change the fact that my father committed grave injustice against the Voss family in order to protect a claim built on falsified records. That truth deserves to be acknowledged, regardless of what practical complications it might create moving forward." Alara reached carefully into the box once more, retrieving the ornate ring she had noticed earlier. "This belonged to my father," she said, turning it carefully in her fingers. "My mother told me it represents formal recognition of the original scholarly alliance's role in founding these Eastern Territories, a recognition that predates your family's current claim by several generations." Cale studied the ring carefully, recognizing symbols he had seen only once before, buried within old archive records he had rarely bothered examining closely during his years of study before assuming the throne. "This changes everything regarding how we understand the foundational history of this entire kingdom." "What do you intend to do with this information?" Fiona asked quietly, voicing the question clearly weighing on everyone present within the chamber. Cale was quiet for a long moment, considering the magnitude of the decision now facing him. Finally, he turned to address Alara directly, his expression carrying the same steady resolve she had witnessed throughout their weeks together, despite the clear difficulty of the moment. "I made you a promise when you first arrived here," he said, "that I would face whatever truth you carried honestly, regardless of what it cost my family's legacy. I intend to keep that promise fully. I will bring this evidence before the complete council, and beyond that, before the wider kingdom itself. The truth of what happened to your family, and the questionable foundation upon which certain aspects of my family's rule were built, deserves proper acknowledgement and resolution. Even if it means surrendering territory your family has governed for over 2 decades? Garrick asked carefully. "If that is what genuine justice requires, then yes," Cale said firmly. "I would rather rule a smaller kingdom, built on honest foundations, then a larger one, resting on injustice, my father chose to bury, rather than properly address. Alara felt tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. Years of carried grief and determination, finally finding release in this singular moment of validation. My mother would be proud to hear you say that, she said softly. She spent her entire life believing this truth would eventually need to be revealed, even though she never lived to see this moment herself. Then let us honor her sacrifice properly, Kale said, by ensuring this truth receives the full acknowledgement and resolution it deserves, rather than remaining buried for another generation, the way my father chose to handle it. As the small gathering began discussing the practical steps necessary to properly present this evidence before the full council and eventually the wider kingdom, Alara found herself experiencing an entirely unfamiliar sensation, the profound relief of finally setting down a burden she had carried for what felt like her entire life. The box remained open on the table before her, its secrets finally revealed after over 2 decades of careful protection. And though significant challenges clearly remained ahead in properly addressing the implications of what it contained, she found herself filled with a cautious, genuine hope that her father's discovery and her mother's sacrifice would finally receive the justice they had always deserved. News of the revelation spread through the fortress with remarkable speed once Kale formally presented the evidence before his full council later that same day. The documents were examined carefully by scholars and record-keepers, summoned specifically for the purpose, their initial skepticism gradually giving way to reluctant acknowledgement as the authenticity of the aged papers and the accompanying seal proved impossible to dispute convincingly. The council chamber, so recently the site of Edmund's dismissive warnings regarding Alara's supposed danger, now buzzed with an entirely different kind of tension, as members grappled with the profound implications of what the evidence revealed. Some, like Prudence, who had initially supported Edmund's cautious suspicions, found themselves genuinely troubled by the confirmation that the old king's actions had been rooted not simply in protecting the kingdom, but in suppressing legitimate evidence of wrongdoing. This changes our understanding of the entire foundational history of these eastern territories, Prudence said during the formal council session, studying the documents spread carefully across the table. If this evidence is genuine, and our scholars confirm it appears to be, then the current claim to this territory rests on considerably less solid ground than we have long assumed. The question now, another council member added, is how we proceed, given this new understanding, without destabilizing the peace and governance structures that have developed over the past 2 decades, regardless of their questionable origins. Kale listened carefully to the debate unfolding around him, allowing his council the space to process the magnitude of the revelation, before offering his own perspective on how the kingdom should move forward. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same steady resolve that had characterized his approach throughout the weeks since Alara's arrival. I do not believe justice requires immediately dismantling the governance structures currently serving these territories, he said. Doing so would likely create chaos and hardship for the many families who have built their lives under the current administration, regardless of its questionable historical foundation. But I do believe formal acknowledgement of the truth is necessary, along with meaningful restitution to the Voss family for the injustice committed against them. What form would that restitution take? Prudence asked. Kale turned toward Alara, who stood quietly near the chamber's edge, watching the proceedings with careful attention. That is a question I believe Alara herself should help answer, given that the injustice was committed primarily against her family. Alara stepped forward, aware of every eye in the chamber now turning toward her, a sensation entirely different from the suspicious scrutiny she had endured during her earlier weeks within these walls. This attention carried something closer to genuine respect, an acknowledgement that her presence here represented far more than simple curiosity or potential threat. I did not come here seeking to reclaim territory or challenge the current governance of these lands, Alara said carefully. My father's discovery was never about seizing power for our own family. He believed simply that history deserved honest documentation, regardless of how uncomfortable that honesty might prove, for those currently in positions of authority. Then what do you seek, if not territorial restitution? Prudence asked, genuine curiosity evident in her tone. Acknowledgement, Alara said simply. Formal recognition that my family's role in this kingdom's founding history was real and significant. That the war waged against us was based on suppressing that truth, rather than any genuine threat we posed. and perhaps, moving forward, a voice within the governance of these territories, ensuring that the scholarly principles my father valued so deeply are properly honored within whatever structures continue developing here. The council chamber fell into thoughtful silence as members considered her request, clearly having anticipated something far more demanding given the magnitude of the evidence presented. Kale watched Ilara with evident admiration, recognizing in her measured response the same integrity that had characterized her father's original discovery decades earlier. "I believe that request is more than reasonable," Kale said finally, addressing his assembled council. "I propose formal restoration of the Voss family name and legacy, along with a designated position within this council, specifically dedicated to preserving accurate historical documentation and scholarly integrity within our kingdom's governance." Ilara, should she choose to accept it, would be the natural candidate to establish and lead that position. Murmurs of consideration moved through the assembled council members, though notably absent was the sharp resistance that had characterized their earlier discussions regarding Ilara's presence within the fortress. The evidence had spoken for itself, and even those who had harbored genuine reservations found themselves unable to dispute the fundamental justice of Kale's proposed resolution. "I would be honored to accept such a position," Ilara said, her voice carrying quiet but genuine emotion as she processed the magnitude of what was being offered. "Though I would ask that any formal acknowledgement also address what happened to Edmund and Peter, along with the others who participated in their conspiracy against me. That matter will be addressed through proper legal proceedings this afternoon," Kale confirmed. "Their actions will not go unpunished, regardless of whatever fears or misguided loyalty motivated them." As the council session drew toward its conclusion, practical discussions beginning regarding the formal documentation and public announcement of these significant developments, Garrick approached Ilara quietly during a brief recess in proceedings. "You handled that with remarkable grace," he said. "Given everything you have endured since your arrival here, I imagine many people would have sought considerably harsher restitution than simple acknowledgement and a voice within governance." "My father never sought power," Ilara said. "He sought truth. I believe honoring his legacy properly means continuing to prioritize that same value, rather than pursuing something he himself would never have wanted." Garrick nodded, clear respect evident in his expression. "Your mother raised you well, despite everything she endured to keep you safe." "She did," Ilara agreed, a bittersweet smile crossing her features. "I only wish she had lived to see this moment herself." "Perhaps, in some sense she has," Garrick offered gently. "Through you, carrying her wishes and her sacrifice to their proper conclusion." As the council prepared to reconvene for the afternoon's formal proceedings regarding Edmund and Peter's judgment, Ilara found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. From a terrified girl stumbling through a deadly snowstorm, carrying a secret too heavy to bear alone, to standing within the very fortress she had once feared more than death itself, now offered genuine respect and a meaningful role in shaping its future governance. The path ahead remained uncertain in many ways, formal announcements still needing to be made throughout the wider kingdom, practical adjustments to governance structures still requiring careful implementation. But for the first time since her mother's passing, Ilara felt genuinely confident that the promise she had carried so faithfully across the frozen mountains had finally found the resolution it deserved, not through conflict or revenge, but through honest reckoning and genuine justice. The formal judgment of Edmund Hale and Peter took place that afternoon before the assembled council, the chamber filled with a tense mixture of soldiers, advisors, and curious onlookers who had heard whispers of the dramatic revelations unfolding throughout the fortress over the preceding hours. Kale presided over the proceedings with careful, measured authority, determined to ensure justice was served fairly, while also acknowledging the genuine, if misguided, concerns that had originally motivated Edmund's actions. Edmund stood before the council with quiet dignity, despite his circumstances, his earlier defiance tempered somewhat by the morning's revelations regarding the true history his old king had worked so hard to suppress. When given opportunity to speak in his own defense, he chose his words carefully. "I acted according to what I genuinely believed necessary to protect this kingdom," Edmund said. "I will not pretend my methods were justified, given what we now understand about the true nature of the threat I believed I was addressing." But I ask the council to understand that my loyalty, however misdirected, stemmed from genuine concern for this realm's stability and safety. Chaol listened carefully before rendering his judgment, weighing the genuine harm Edmund's actions had caused against the decades of otherwise loyal service he had provided the kingdom. Your intentions, however misguided in this particular instance, do not excuse the harm caused through unauthorized force against someone under my direct protection. However, I recognize that your service to this kingdom over many years carries genuine value, and I am not inclined toward the harshest possible punishment, given the full circumstances now understood. The council ultimately determined that Edmund would be stripped of his formal position and influence within governance, required to make direct restitution to Alara for the harm caused, and placed under extended probation, during which any further transgression would result in permanent exile from the kingdom's territories. Peter received a similar though somewhat less severe judgment, given his more junior position, and the fact that his actions, while dangerous, had ultimately caused no lasting physical harm. As the formal proceedings concluded and the chamber slowly began emptying, Alara found herself approached by Edmund directly, the older man's expression carrying genuine, unguarded remorse for perhaps the first time since their initial confrontation weeks earlier. I owe you a proper apology, Edmund said, his voice quiet but sincere, not simply for the physical harm caused, but for the years of unwarranted suspicion your family endured, based on fears that, as we now understand, were built on a foundation of suppressed truth, rather than genuine threat. Thank you for saying that, Alara replied, studying his expression carefully and finding genuine sincerity, rather than the calculated manipulation she had originally suspected during their earlier encounters. I understand that fear, once deeply rooted, is difficult to release, even when confronted with evidence that challenges it directly. Your grace in accepting this apology speaks well of the family you come from, Edmund said. I hope, in time, I might earn some measure of trust back through continued service to this kingdom, however diminished my role may now become. I believe genuine change is always possible, Alara said, provided the willingness to pursue it remains sincere. As Edmund departed the chamber, escorted by guards toward the beginning of his newly reduced circumstances within the fortress, Chaol approached Alara, his expression carrying quiet satisfaction at how the difficult proceedings had ultimately resolved. You showed him more grace than many would have offered, given everything he put you through, Chaol observed. Holding on to anger accomplishes little beyond prolonging pain, Alara said. My mother taught me that lesson through her own example, choosing always to focus on preserving what remained of our family, rather than dwelling on vengeance against those who had wronged us. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Chaol said. She was, Alara agreed, a soft, wistful smile crossing her features. I wish you could have known her properly, rather than simply through the story I have been able to share. As evening settled over the fortress, the dramatic events of the day finally beginning to give way to quieter reflection, Chaol and Alara found themselves once again walking together along the familiar ramparts where so many of their earlier conversations had taken place. The mountains beyond glowed with the deep orange and purple hues of a spectacular sunset, the kind of view that had become increasingly precious to Alara during her weeks within these walls, a reminder that beauty and peace remained possible even amid the significant challenges and dangers she had faced. What happens now? Alara asked, watching the colors shift slowly across the distant peaks. Formal announcements will need to be made throughout the kingdom regarding the revelations we uncovered today, Chaol said. It will not be a simple process, and I imagine we will face continued resistance from those who benefit from the current arrangement, regardless of its questionable historical foundation. But I believe the truth deserves proper acknowledgement, and I intend to see that process through, however long and difficult it might prove. And my role within your council? Alara asked. Are you certain that arrangement will be well received throughout the wider kingdom? I am certain it is the right decision, regardless of how it is initially received, Chaol said firmly. You bring exactly the kind of scholarly integrity and commitment to truth that this kingdom needs moving forward, particularly given how easily that same truth was suppressed and buried during my father's reign. Alara studied his profile in the fading evening light, recognizing in his steady, unwavering commitment to justice and truth qualities she had never expected to find within these fortress walls. Qualities that stood in stark, remarkable contrast to everything her mother's careful warnings had taught her to expect. The journey that had begun with a desperate flight through deadly snow, carrying a secret too heavy to bear alone, had led her somewhere she never could have imagined. Not simply to safety, but to genuine purpose, respect, and an unexpected partnership with the very kingdom she had once believed represented nothing but danger. "Thank you," she said softly, "for proving that trust, however difficult to extend, was worth the risk in this particular case." "Thank you," Cale replied, turning to meet her gaze directly, "for having the courage to walk through that storm and bring the truth here, despite everything you had every reason to fear about what awaited you within these walls." As the sun finally disappeared completely behind the distant mountain peaks, casting the fortress into the gentle blue hues of early evening, both of them remained standing together along the quiet ramparts, the weight of the day's dramatic events finally beginning to settle into something resembling peace, though both understood clearly that significant work still remained ahead in properly resolving the complex implications of the truth now finally revealed. Weeks passed following the dramatic revelations within the council chamber, and the fortress gradually settled into a new rhythm, shaped by the significant changes now unfolding throughout the kingdom. Formal announcements had been made regarding the true history of the Eastern Territories, carefully worded proclamations that acknowledged past injustice while emphasizing Cale's commitment to honest, just governance moving forward. As anticipated, the news generated considerable discussion and some resistance throughout various regions of the kingdom, though Cale's steady, transparent handling of the matter gradually earned him increased respect, even among those initially skeptical of such a significant historical reckoning. Alara settled into her new role within the council with growing confidence, establishing careful protocols for preserving accurate historical records and ensuring that future governance decisions would be grounded in properly documented truth, rather than convenient political narrative. Her scholarly approach, inherited directly from her father's own careful methodology, quickly earned respect from council members who had initially harbored reservations about her unconventional path to such an influential position. Fiona remained a steady, trusted friend throughout this transition period, often joining Alara during quiet evenings spent reviewing old archive documents, the two women developing an easy companionship that provided welcome balance amid the significant responsibilities Alara had assumed. Nora continued checking in periodically as well, less out of medical necessity now that Alara had fully recovered from her earlier ordeal, and more from the genuine friendship that had developed between them during those difficult early weeks. Garrick, too, remained a constant, reassuring presence, his initial discovery of Alara during that fateful snowstorm patrol having set in motion everything that followed. He often reflected, during quiet moments shared with Cale, on how differently events might have unfolded had his patrol taken a different route that day, had they somehow missed the desperate girl stumbling through the deadly storm. "Fate has a strange way of guiding events toward their proper conclusion," Garrick observed one evening, as he and Cale reviewed reports together in the king's private study. "Perhaps," Cale agreed, though his attention remained partially distracted, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the window overlooking the courtyard, where Alara could often be found during evening hours, walking slowly through the gardens while reviewing documents, or simply enjoying the quiet peace that had gradually become more common within the fortress. Garrick noticed the direction of his king's attention and allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "You have grown quite fond of her, I think, beyond simply appreciating her contributions to the council." Cale did not immediately deny the observation, though a faint color rose to his cheeks at being so directly confronted with feelings he had been carefully, perhaps too carefully, avoiding fully acknowledging even to himself. "She has proven herself remarkable in every way, Garrick. Her courage, her integrity, her commitment to justice, even when it would have been far easier to seek simple revenge against my family for the wrongs committed against her own. That sounds like considerably more than professional admiration, my king." Cale allowed himself a rare, genuine laugh at his old friend's gentle teasing. "Perhaps it is, though I confess, I am uncertain how to properly express such feelings, given everything Alara has endured at the hands of my family's legacy. I would not wish to burden her with expectations she may not be ready or willing to embrace." "I suspect," Garrick said carefully, that Alara is entirely capable of determining her own readiness in such matters, without requiring you to make that decision on her behalf through excessive caution. Cale considered his friend's words carefully, recognizing the wisdom within them, even as old uncertainty continued lingering at the edges of his growing feelings. Later that same evening, as the last light of day faded beyond the mountains, he found himself walking once again toward the fortress gardens, drawn by something beyond simple habit, toward the quiet space where he knew Alara often spent her evening hours. He found her exactly where he expected, seated on the familiar bench where so many of their earliest, most significant conversations had taken place, a small collection of documents spread across her lap as she worked carefully through evening review of the council's ongoing historical documentation project. "Working late again?" Cale asked, settling onto the opposite end of the bench with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the preceding weeks. "There is a great deal of work still required," Alara said, though she set the documents aside as he joined her, giving him her full attention. "Properly documenting decades of obscured history is not a task that resolves quickly." "You have accomplished remarkable progress already," Cale observed. "The council speaks highly of your dedication and skill." "Thank you," Alara said, a genuine smile crossing her features. "Though I confess, some of that dedication stems from simply enjoying the work itself. My father instilled in me a deep appreciation for careful, honest scholarship, and finding purpose in continuing that legacy brings me genuine satisfaction." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long moment, the quiet garden around them settling into the peaceful stillness of early evening. Finally Cale spoke, his voice carrying a careful vulnerability that Alara had rarely witnessed from him during their many weeks of interaction. "Alara, I want to speak with you about something beyond council matters, if you are willing to hear it." She turned to face him fully, curiosity evident in her expression. "Of course. These past weeks, working alongside you, watching you navigate such significant challenges with remarkable grace and integrity, I have found myself developing feelings that extend well beyond simple professional respect," Cale said, choosing his words carefully. "I understand fully if such feelings are unwelcome, given everything my family's legacy has cost you. But I did not wish to continue hiding them from you any longer." Ilara's breath caught slightly at his words, though the reaction carried none of the wariness or suspicion that might once have characterized her response to such a confession from someone bearing his family's crest. Instead, she found herself experiencing something entirely different, a warmth that had been slowly, cautiously building throughout their weeks together, one she had perhaps been reluctant to fully acknowledge herself. "I do not find such feelings unwelcome at all," she said softly. "I have found myself experiencing something similar, Cale, though I confess I struggled initially to reconcile such feelings with everything I was raised to believe about your family and this fortress." "And now?" Cale asked, hope evident in his careful question. "Now," Alara said, "I have come to understand that judging someone based solely on their family's past mistakes, rather than their own genuine character and choices, would be a disservice to everything you have shown me during these past weeks. You faced uncomfortable truths about your own family's history with remarkable courage. You protected me, repeatedly, even against pressure from your own trusted advisors. You have proven yourself, again and again, to be nothing like the man my mother taught me to fear." Cale reached carefully for her hand, and she allowed the connection, warmth spreading through the simple contact between them. "Then perhaps," he said, "we might consider building something new together, something that honors both our family's complicated history, while creating a future defined by honesty and genuine partnership, rather than old fear and suspicion." "I would like that very much," Alara said, genuine happiness evident in her voice, for perhaps the first time since her arrival within these walls months earlier. As the last light of evening finally faded completely into the gentle darkness of night, stars beginning to emerge across the clear mountain sky above them, Cale and Alara remained together in the quiet garden, the weight of old fears and inherited conflict finally giving way to something entirely new, a partnership built not on the shadows of the past, but on the shared commitment to truth, justice, and genuine understanding that had brought them together in the first place. In the months that followed, their partnership deepened both personally and professionally, Alara's role within the council expanding, as trust and respect continued growing throughout the kingdom. The mark on her hand, once a symbol of a hunted, nearly forgotten bloodline, gradually transformed into something entirely different in the eyes of those who had come to know her true character. A symbol of resilience, integrity, and the remarkable capacity for healing that could emerge even from the deepest historical wounds, when approached with genuine courage and honest reckoning. The kingdom itself began slowly transforming as well, governance structures gradually adjusting to properly honor the truth that had finally emerged from decades of careful concealment. Old fears did not disappear entirely, some resistance continuing to linger among those most invested in the previous, more convenient narrative. But under Chaol and Ilara's combined leadership, a foundation of genuine transparency and justice began taking root, one that promised a far more stable and honest future than the fragile peace built on suppressed truth that had characterized the previous decades of rule. And on quiet evenings, when the demands of governance and reconciliation finally allowed for peaceful reflection, Chaol and Ilara often found themselves returning to that same garden bench where so much of their remarkable journey together had unfolded, grateful for the storm that had once seemed like nothing but danger and had ultimately led them toward a future neither of them could have imagined when a mysterious girl first stumbled out of the deadly snow, carrying a sealed box and a truth powerful enough to transform an entire kingdom.